We've already talked about why some Bibles have different numbers of books in them, as well as why some Bibles have different verses within those books. See link in the description below for those videos. But there are still dozens of good modern translations who use the same good Greek text who have radically different interpretations and translations of the same passage. So what's going on with those? Why are there so many modern translations, and what makes them different? Why can't they just agree? When I took my first Spanish class, we were given lists of vocabulary words, one word in English, one word in Spanish, and we were told to memorize those. Then, as a class, we would translate sentences from English into Spanish and back and forth using those vocabulary lists. And every single word had a perfect match. So the only time anyone's translation differed in the entire class was if someone had made a mistake, because we were all working off of the same vocabulary list. Apply the same mentality to translating the Bible, and it becomes quite disturbing, even nefarious, that versions can't agree with each other. All you have to do is pick the right word and put it down, right? Well, it turns out languages are a lot more complicated than you learn in any introductory course. In reality, there is no perfect one-to-one equivalence between words in the same language, let alone in other languages. Every word is designed to represent a concept that could not perfectly be described by any other word. Each word has its own circle of meaning, so to speak, that it represents. Sometimes that circle is quite specific and quite narrow in focus, like the word appendectomy, for instance, while other times the circle of meaning that a word represents is a wide encompassing idea, like the word big. But no other word quite matches, quite encompasses the circle of meaning that an individual word represents. Okay, I know this is confusing, so let's look at an example. The word big refers to things that are more than average, and English has a lot of other words that are quite similar. If I said that's a big house, you could take the word big and replace it with tall, enormous, or huge, and the basic meaning would still be maintained. But you wouldn't say that a Komodo dragon was tall, even though it is big, because tall refers to greater than average vertically. Nor does saying you're such a big girl mean the same thing as you're such an enormous girl, because big can refer to greater than average maturity or age, not just size or width. The concept each word is meant to convey differs slightly, even though there is a great deal of overlap between them. There is no one word that can replace the word big in every sentence, especially in a sentence like "that was very big of you," because in that case, the word big means greater than average generosity or selflessness. And so it would have to be replaced by something completely different than a standard synonym like huge. And this is just within one language. Each language developed in a different culture and expresses the ideas and the unique thinking that was required to represent the worldview and the understanding of that culture. There is no perfect match between words in different languages. A good way of thinking about it is as if each word has 5 nuances, 5 different shades of meaning that word can represent. And so any word that you pick to translate from one language to another, you're only going to be able to match 3 of those particular nuances. And so you're going to pick up 2 new ones, and you're going to lose 2 old nuances with any translation, and that's the best one. Sometimes translations have only 1 nuance that matches, but it's the important nuance for that sentence. But that means you're going to pick up to 4 new ones that were never in the original. It's only natural that different translators will pick out different nuances from the root word that they feel best represents that word in a particular context. This is why a word with a basic meaning of to bring to anger can be translated in Colossians with such different meanings as exasperate, embitter, provoke, or being too hard on someone. Each translation is pulling a different nuance of the original word, and each one loses something and picks something up that wasn't there. That is the nature of translation. And this is just for individual words. What about phrases? Exodus 32:10 literally says, "Let my nose burn hot and consume them." This is obviously a cultural expression that is so different to us, so foreign to us, that a simple one-to-one translation would be meaningless. What does "my nose burning hot" mean? So is the truest representation of the Bible in the individual words or in the ideas and concepts that those words represent and conveyed to the original readers? Which of those needs to be translated the most into modern English? Literal translations like the NASB or Young's find the meaning in the individual words of Scripture and translate it differently only when the original would make utterly no sense to retain it as it is. But other translations, like the NIV or the CEB, try to match up not individual words, but phrases with a modern phrase that has a similar meaning, because they find the meaning of the Bible to be found in the ideas that it represents as opposed to the individual words, and they try and represent that in their translations. But there are other things in a text that convey meaning as well. The Bible conveys emotions and provokes reactions. It has genre and it has style. Are those things important enough to translate as well? We're used to the Bible sounding stilted and hard to read even at times, but the Gospel of Mark was written using such simple language that if we represented the style of Mark today, we would have to use text speak and emojis to get it across. Is that important? Is speaking style important to bring across in a translation? These questions are especially important when it comes to ancient poetry, of which the Bible is chock full. What is the truth that needs to be conveyed through poetry? Poetry is decidedly not literal, so where should we put our focus instead? Should it be on the words, the feelings that they invoke, the style, the flow, the rhythm? Each translation has a slightly different way of answering these questions, but in general, the more paraphrased a translation is, the more it's probably going to be trying to replicate style, flow, and readability to try to recreate the original reader's experience and not the individual word for word of the text. But no translation can do all of these things at once. Hopefully, it will be good at replicating one aspect of Scripture's truth, but they will invariably fall down on another. And the weaknesses of a text can mislead the reader. The more literal something is, in general, the more likely it is that we will misinterpret our version. The more paraphrased it is, the more likely it is that the translator misinterpreted the original. But both of them can lead us down into grave error. So what's an average Christian to do other than learn the original languages, which is out of reach for most of us? Well, a couple of quick things. First, never rely on one translation. Grab a couple of different translations from opposite ends of the spectrum and use them as checks and balances with each other. If you don't know where a particular translation lies on the spectrum, check their forward. Invariably, the translators will give a note of where they're coming from and what they're trying to achieve. Second, memorize a few key verses to you and look those up in any new translation you encounter so that you can see how it changes from the basis that you memorized. Third, use each version for what it's best at. For instance, don't use the Message Bible for a word study that you're going to do. That's not what it was meant for. It was meant to create the readability and invoke the same emotions and experiences as the original text. It was not meant to maintain the same words. Likewise, I wouldn't recommend using a highly literal translation for a devotional work because it will probably leave you very cold. There are no perfect translations, but there are quite a few good ones. Use them together to get a better appreciation of the text that we all love and are attempting to understand. As always, thanks for watching. See you next video.